Hey, welcome back. Previous video, last week I uploaded a video entitled Shitty Parents Should Consider Death and Dying. I think more biological parents, people who are creating the little people and raising little people, should really take some time to contemplate that second half of life more thoroughly. We all should. I mean, I believe that everyone, especially when we're young, we should take that time to really try to process the fact that most of us are gonna grow old, and that's worth thinking about. There's a lot worth preparing for there. But especially if you're gonna create little people, if you're gonna do something like that, holy shit, you really gotta consider that second half of life a lot more thoroughly than the people who are creating people typically do. You know, because the bulk of the people creating the people are early 20s. That looks to be a large portion of the people that are bringing about something as profound as the fully developed people, what it will eventually be, because that's what it means to have a baby. And that's wild. That's crazy. That is. I don't think, if you take a moment to really think about that, like, what sort of thoughts, who's creating the bulk of the people? Damn, that's fucking insane. But yeah, I think more people should consider that, who are creating biological people, in terms of their own self-interests. In terms of, yes, if you create a person or if you create people with someone, the process of that, how you go about raising that little person or those little people it's going to play a role in your own quality of life later on down the road. You know, and the dying process specifically in that video is what I discussed. You know, like, yes, there are a lot of things that you can do to make that process that awaits in the future. That is the fate of most of us. You know, sometimes death is more of an instantaneous sort of thing. It's not very drawn out. But yes, over time, death is becoming something that really does take a while. And, you know, you can argue that in some ways that might be good, like we're extending human life. And in some ways it is. Because I'm horrified of death. I'm not looking forward to dying. But I'm also not looking forward to that process, what will very likely consist of a very slow, painful, agonizing departure, both physically and psychologically. But I've been thinking, though, there are so many things that can make that departure so much worse. And that's becoming a more common source of severe psychological suffering later on in life. Like people who have created people, who do have biological children, but are still, in spite of this, still dying slowly, isolated, alone. Not just, but emotionally. Like no one really cares about them at that time. And again, one very common reason as to why this is the case and why it's becoming more and more of the case, it's becoming more common. That's a more common fate for many people, and that's it's complex. But one is, yes, of course, more and more people are treating the creation of people as though it's a whimsical fucking joke, in terms of like who they're fucking and how they're fucking them, and then that leading to the creation of human beings. Of course, you're gonna see the consequences of that snowball into the later stages of life, and that's a good example. You know, you have more and more people treating that process of development, of childhood, for their own children, and not doing anywhere near what they can to prepare their own children for the eventual severe difficulties of being a fully developed adult on planet Earth. You have more people doing that, just a really shitty job of that, and then they grow up, and then they just don't give a fuck about their own biological parents while their parents are slowly dying. And I was just thinking, of course, that is a pretty fatal, it's a pretty futile attempt to just like, hey, if you've created someone or if you've created people, all you people who've created people out there, you should probably try to do a better job of that, because you want to consider death and dying more thoroughly. I don't think there's much potential there, but I think there's more potential and trying to get to the root of it a little bit more. Just to like, okay, well, what goes into it? What is a shitty parent? Where do shitty parents come from? Why is it the case that the pool of parents, like the people who are creating and raising little people, it's becoming a shittier pool? Like people who are doing that, it's just shittier. It's becoming shittier over time. Parents are becoming shittier. people who are doing that are just really doing a terrible job more commonly. It's becoming more common, I think. And it's complex. Where was I going with that? Right. I don't know. Right. Where do shitty parents come from? Trying to get to the root of that. Instead of like trying to get through to the parents who are already parents, trying to get to like the people who haven't yet become shitty parents. Because some very common factors into what makes a shitty parent is who they've had children with, who they've went about creating people with, and that origin story of that little person that'll eventually become a fully developed person. And like, what does that often look like? And that's becoming a less ideal origin story. I think the origin stories of human beings are becoming, it's like very common one. It's just two people that wanted to fuck one another, just wanted to fuck each other. And then conception, and then they carried it to term for a multitude of different reasons as to why that's the thing. But yeah, trying to just get through to the people who haven't yet done that, the prospective shitty parents, the people who stand to become shitty parents. Because that's a very no-brainer. That's a very obvious reason as to why so many people suck as biological parents. Like you have, fatherlessness, people growing up in single-parent households, never knowing the father, and then the mother who oftentimes will struggle to be a decent mother, let alone a father. And that's becoming a more common sort of origin story. And just trying to get people who stand to do that to just think about it for a moment. Like before you find yourself in that sort of predicament, just thinking about some cause and effect, some consequence there. Because who you have a child with, if you're going to have a child, it matters a lot. I mean, it matters so much. Words could never suffice. If you're going to do that, who you do it with, oh my God, it matters. It matters so much. And I know that's like, there are reasons as to why that is, but there are some very obvious ones there in terms of like raising the little person. Many people don't do a very good job of raising little people. And you should try to find someone that's going to do a good job of that. You should try. Hey, there's going to be limitation there, of course. But you shouldn't just have a child with like anybody. You shouldn't do that. And you should try to take some steps to avoid finding yourself in that sort of predicament where you've now created a person with someone that you really shouldn't have done that with. If you were going to do it at all, you really fucked up in terms of who you went about doing that with and the process of that. So just, like if you have the capacity, if you're able to shoot fertile loads into fertile holes, you should be careful about that, because that capacity is not something to be taken lightly. That is there's a lot of potential for very, very bad to come about as a consequence of that. With great power comes great responsibility, and that is, to bring about something that consequential, that profound, just as a consequence of just shooting loads, like you got to be careful about that, And then also with women, hey, if you have a fertile hole, you should be careful about fertile loads going in terms of, just being more careful with who you fuck and how you fuck them with respect to the potential consequences. And then also, hey, weighing out some pros and cons. And if you find yourself in that predicament where there's now like a little embryo developing inside of you, just thinking about, well, what's that life really going to look like? Just making those sorts of considerations, taking the time to do that and trying to be realistic about it, trying to be really realistic about it in terms of, if I am to carry this guy's conception inside to term, what's that really going to result in? What is that going to... Just be realistic about that. I think more people should try to do that. Just trying to be a little bit more realistic about cause and effect and in terms of creating people. I think instead of trying to get like the people who are already shitty parents to be better, I think it's probably more realistic to just say, hey, if you're someone who could quite easily end up becoming a shitty parent in the future, you should think about cause and effect a lot more thoroughly than many people tend to do that. I think that's probably like a more realistic sort of goal, ambition. Just try to get more people to just think about it a little bit more. But yeah, I think, and I don't know, I see like a lot of the discussion around this topic in terms of creating people, like having children. Like there are many people who are child free who will just bash the whole process of creating a person and raising a person. And they'll just all around, like not only is it a selfish thing, but it's just an all around stupid thing to do, to create a little person. And, you know, it's a stupid thing to create a person. It's a stupid thing to have to raise a little need machine, a little fucking waste of oxygen. It's just, you know, taking up space, and it's being real loud, and it's taking away from my freedom. And those sorts of, I don't know, I think that those are worth considering, and that's, I've factored that in a fair bit in terms of why I don't think I'm ever gonna, you know, but I really do think it's important to keep in mind it's a very small window of time in terms of raising a little person and creating a little person. And, you know, bringing it back to the whole idea of many people really don't think far past creating a baby, like having a baby, and the fact that the baby is going to become something a fuck of a lot more complicated, complex than just a baby. It's way more. You're doing way more than just having a baby when you're having a baby. In so many ways, it's a very, very, very big deal. And I think the child-free and like the shitting on the whole idea of having a child and just all aspects of it, I don't know. I think more people who have already created people, they need to hear some of the other stuff. Like people, because there are so many people who have already created people who are doing just a shitty job of being a parent. And I think if they took the time to consider the less shitty aspects of what it is to raise a little person, and to actually like to have a child, to have a little person that'll grow up into a big person, because it's pretty, there's some neat aspects of that. There's some really, really meaningful aspects of that, of having a child, that more people should consider, especially the people who have already done it. The people who have already done it and aren't doing what they can do to take care of their little creations. I think they need, and they need motivation. They need incentive. And there is a fair bit of arguments. There are quite a few arguments to be made that having a child, there are some pretty sentimental, substantial aspects of being a parent that look to be quite special. I'm not selling it very well, but I don't have kids. I don't know how to do that most effectively, but I feel like most people who do have children and they're trying to like sell people on it in terms of like trying to convince them, hey, maybe you should do it, maybe, because it's kind of cool in some ways. I think a lot of parents, they don't do a very good job of really selling that, I don't think. The ones that are actually attempting to. Some of them will be honest and just be like, man, this sucks, for the most part. Because, yeah, but I do think that the best arguments in favor of, hey, maybe you should have a child is just, yeah, I mean, that relationship with that little person that'll eventually become a big person, there aren't many relationships that one could have here on planet Earth as a human being that'll compare to that. Again, if you do a good job of it, and depending upon who you have a child with and all those sorts of important factors, but there are some very, very, in terms of long-term, in terms of actual long-term cause and effect, having a child with someone that you feel very, very attached to, soul bonded with, or whatever you want to call it, in love. There are many aspects of it in terms of long-term that are worth considering, that more people who have already created people especially should consider. In terms of, yeah, if you already have a child, you should really do what you can moving forward to for more reasons than one.